My name is Nova Hale, and for 20 years, I believed my life was rooted as deeply as the vines stretching across our family vineyard in Napa Valley. Autumn was always my favorite season, the time when the air turned crisp, the hills glowed with shades of amber and gold, and the scent of ripening grapes drifted through every corner of our land. Harvest meant long days, purple-stained hands, and aching backs. But it also meant celebration, legacy, and love. Or at least it used to. Because last autumn, everything I thought I knew about love and loyalty shattered in a single evening. The Hale Vineyard wasn't just a business. It was my identity. My father planted the first rose when I was a child. And after he passed, my husband, Daniel, promised me we would build an empire together. And for years, I believed him. We poured our hearts into the soil, fought through droughts and fires, and turned a modest vineyard into one of the most respected labels in the valley. Daniel was charming, too charming, maybe. Investors loved him, sommeliers praised him, and customers adored his smile during tastings. I let him take the spotlight while I managed the books, the workers, and the details nobody noticed but everyone relied on. We were a team. Or so I thought. I still remember the night I discovered the truth. It was late September during the Harvest Festival, a tradition we hosted every year for clients, critics, and friends of the vineyard. The courtyard was glowing with string lights, glasses clinked, and the hum of laughter floated through the air. I was standing by the oak barrels when I noticed Daniel slip away with Lila, our new sommelier. She was young, maybe 27, with hair the color of sunshine and a laugh that rang like wind chimes. She had been with us only a few months, but Daniel seemed to orbit around her. At first, I told myself it was harmless. He was mentoring her, guiding her in the art of wine. But that night I followed them. I shouldn't have. Maybe ignorance would have been kinder, but curiosity pulled me into the shadowed hallway that led to the private tasting room. And there they were. Daniel's hand pressed against the small of her back, her lips tilted up toward his. Their whispers too intimate to be professional, and then I saw his mouth on hers. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My heart pounded so violently I thought it might shatter through my ribs. The laughter outside dimmed, replaced by the ringing silence of betrayal. My hands trembled around the glass I was holding until it slipped and shattered on the floor, the sound startling them both. They turned, faces pale, and I will never forget the way Daniel looked at me. Not with guilt, not even with shame, but with annoyance, as if I had interrupted something trivial. "Nova," he muttered, straightening his shirt. "This isn't what it looks like." But it was, and we all knew it. Lila looked down, cheeks flushed, and I felt my stomach twist with nausea. I wanted to scream, to rage, to tear the whole vineyard down around them. Instead, I walked away. Because at that moment, words would have been too small for the fire blazing in my chest. That night, lying awake in the farmhouse bedroom we once shared, I listened to the harvesters laughing outside, their joy echoing in sharp contrast to the emptiness inside me. I thought of all the sacrifices I had made, the years of labor, the sleepless nights during frost warnings, the family gatherings I had missed because the vines needed me more. I thought of my father, who entrusted this land to me, and how easily Daniel had betrayed not only me, but our legacy. Tears blurred my vision, but beneath the grief was something harder, colder. Rage. A week later, Daniel called me into his office. His words cut deeper than the kiss I had witnessed. "Nova," he said, not even looking me in the eyes. "The board thinks it's time for you to take a step back. You've done enough here. Let me handle things from now on." Done enough? I nearly laughed in his face. Every bottle that carried the Hale name was built on my sweat, my decisions, my sacrifices. And now he wanted to erase me, replace me with her, and claim everything as his own? I didn't argue. I didn't fight. Not yet. Because in that moment, I realized something important. Daniel thought I was broken. He thought he had silenced me, but he had only awakened something far more dangerous. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to destroy him. And my revenge would be vintage. I learned a dangerous thing about vineyards. The soil remembers. It remembers the footsteps of those who planted, the hours of laughter and the nights of fear. It remembers what was built honestly and what was built on lies. I realized, sitting on the farmhouse porch the morning after Daniel's words, that if the land remembers, so do I. And I had a long memory. First, I needed a plan that didn't look like a plan. If I stormed the boardroom or lit a dramatic match on the tasting room rug, Daniel would use it as proof I'd lost my mind and would have the legal advantage. So I chose patience and a different kind of violence. Quiet work, layered like lees at the bottom of a barrel. I began with inventory, literal and human. I read through old contracts, invoices, and the emails I had kept out of habit. I made lists of our distributors, our top clients, and the sommeliers who had praised our label in reviews. I wrote down the names of the people who really mattered to our business and the small favors we had done for them over the years. There were dozens. There were also weaknesses. People who trusted Daniel because of his smile and hadn't looked deeper. Next, I had to build a brand that could stand beside Hale and not be dismissed. If I couldn't hold the name, I would build a different one that carried everything I'd poured into those vines. I rented a small rented space 2 valleys over, an old cooper's workshop with sunlit windows and the smell of oak. I hired a retired winemaker, Marco, who had taught me the difference between a wine that whispered and one that sang. Marco owed my father a favor and owed me honesty. He agreed to work for me under the condition of secrecy. Secrecy became my currency. Every meeting with Marco was at dawn, hands dusted in grape bloom, voices low. I tasted barrels alone, wrote tasting notes in a battered notebook, and designed labels I would not yet show to anyone. I created a profile in my head for the label, something rooted in soil and craft, a line of small batch wines that honored the oldest rows on the property. I named the project Ashen Root. It felt like a promise and a threat. But building a winery in secret is not only about barrels and a man who knows when a grape will sing, it's about people. So I turned to the one thing Daniel had underestimated: relationships built quietly over decades. There was Rosa, the head chef at a Michelin-starred restaurant in San Francisco, who had taken a shine to our 2017 reserve, because I had once brought her a pistachio tart after a bad review. There was Henri, an independent wine buyer in Seattle, who had once helped my father secure a rare oak for barrels. There was Mei Ling, a sommelier at a boutique hotel who kept a handwritten ledger of wines she loved. I went to them the way you go to old friends, with humility, with memory, and with a desperation I could not disguise. I did not say Daniel had cheated. I did not scream about betrayal. I told short, careful truths, that I was making a new line, that it honored the old vines, that I wanted people who understood craft to see it first. I brought small samples, unlabeled, wrapped in brown paper so their eyes couldn't be fooled by a name. Rosa tasted, and something softened in her face. She asked for more, and rearranged a closed tasting, one that would not appear on any calendar but would matter. Mei Ling wrote down my phone number with a steadiness that felt like an arm around my shoulder. Every success mattered. Every small order I secured felt like a stitch in a new life. But secrets breed consequences, and revenge breeds attention. Daniel began to suspect something. He was not stupid. He had to be checked. He started getting involved where he never had before, stopping by barrels, asking questions, smiling too widely at the workers as if bluster could hide the fact he was flailing. That's when the first twist happened. Someone started leaking Ashen Root's existence to a gossip column that fancied itself an arbiter of vineyard drama. A short, coy piece mentioned a mysterious new label from Napa's past, and within days, messages flooded in. Some curious, some congratulatory, some clearly aimed at drawing me out. I wondered if Daniel had a mole. I wondered if Lila had realized the threat she posed to her employer. I wondered whether anyone could be trusted. I learned to distrust the obvious and to read the small things. A forgotten receipt, a name slipped in conversation, a hand that lingered too long on a barrel. I changed meeting places. I called Marco from a payphone. Yes, a payphone, because it was ridiculous and therefore less suspect. I smuggled barrels to our rented cooperage at night in the back of a van labeled Orchard Supplies. I hired a young intern, Jonah, nominally to help with shipping, but really because he was a fast learner and had a clean conscience. The stakes rose when the regional tasting calendar was announced. The Valley Collective Festival, a prestigious event where distributors, press, and influential sommeliers gathered each October. Daniel liked the festival because it was his stage. It was where he had taken our brand to the next level last year, where he had dazzled buyers with his performance. That's when the daring part of the plan formed in my mind. If I could crash Daniel's stage, if Ash and Root could appear in the same festival, quietly, with the right people in the right rooms, then the comparison would be inevitable. My wines were different. They were quieter, more honest. But if matched against Daniel's confident showmanship, they would speak in a way he could not control. I also needed leverage, something Daniel could not explain away. So I started assembling the other half of my strategy, proof. Not only of his affair, which the town already murmured about, but of his business manipulations, the contracts he had rewritten, the invoices he had altered, the deals he had quietly cut that stripped profits from our family and into accounts he controlled. Legal proof could collapse him, but proof without context was clumsy. I needed it presented as narrative, as inevitability. I began collecting documents, quietly copying ledgers in the dead of night, storing them in a safe deposit box under an alias. I set up a burner email to send anonymous tips to reporters who had once admired my father's integrity. I recorded one conversation where Daniel all but admitted his plan to sideline me, his voice oily and confident in a Barolo-soaked way. I had to be careful. Evidence had to be undeniable and assembled like a tasting menu, with each course exposing more until the meal could not be ignored. Obstacles multiplied. Daniel tightened his circle, making it harder to approach mutual clients without looking suspicious. Lila grew more visible, appearing at tastings and leaning into cameras. The vineyard workers grew nervous. Rumors are a contagion in small towns. And worst of all, my own resolve wavered some nights. There were moments I wanted to abandon the fight, to sell the land, to walk away with dignity. But then I would walk among the rows at dawn, touch the leaves, and remember my father teaching me how to prune a vine with a surgeon's patience. The memory steeled me. As October approached, the valley took on the hush of waiting. Leaves fell like muted applause. The festival loomed. I had built a label in secret, found allies, and gathered proof. I had risked relationships and reputation. I had, in the quietest possible way, prepared a battlefield. The night before the festival, Marco and I tasted through Ash and Root's first formal lineup in the half-dark of the workshop. His hand brushed mine as he handed me a glass. And for a sliver of a moment, there was no revenge, only the simple, fragile joy of making something true. Then my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. "We've got a seat for Ash and Root tomorrow. Don't say your name." I felt the world narrow to the rim of that glass. This was it, one small, dangerous opening. And I was about to walk through it. The morning of the festival smelled like coffee and crushed leaves. I parked at the edge of town before dawn, the van rattling with unmarked crates, and walked the last stretch to the fairgrounds like someone carrying contraband and a prayer. At the gate, a familiar face stepped forward. Victor Leland, the festival director, and once my father's closest friend. He had a way of folding the world into a polite smile. For years he had been the one who smoothed our rough edges when business got ugly. I hadn't seen him in months, not since I went quiet. "Nova," he said, and his voice was the same voice that had read me bedtime stories when I was a child. "You're early." I smiled because politeness was a currency at events like this. "We're delivering a demo run," I said. "Ash and Root." Victor's smile flickered. There was a second that stretched thin and sharp, an almost recognition of my name that I couldn't quite place. "Not Hale?" he asked. "No," I said, "not Hale." He let me through with the kind of nod that meant he knew more than he said. That nod cost me nothing and bought me everything. Inside, the festival pulsed. Tents lined the hillside like white blossom teeth. Servers in crisp black carried trays. Sommeliers in pressed jackets debated oak toast levels, and cameras hovered like curious birds. Daniel's booth was a stage, lights, a banner with the Hale crest, a small army of people in shirts that matched his tie. He moved through them like a king. I set up quietly, my labels facing inward so that no one could see the name. Jonah rolled crates, Marco checked corks, and I breathed. I let my hands go on routine, arrange, polish, decant, because ritual steadied me more than words. The first tasting was a closed session for buyers. I'd arranged it the way Henri had suggested. Small group, blind pours, no fanfare. The room was a square of hushed light. I watched as they took the first sip, then the second, saw the micro movements that told me they were listening to the wine and not to me. Rosa slipped in, a practiced smile masked with curiosity. Mei-Ling sat in the corner, jotting notes. The buyers shifted. One man cleared his throat and said, "What is this?" "Just taste," Henri said, handing him another glass. "No names." They did. The room changed. Where Daniel's crowd showed up like a performance, this felt like confession. Someone whispered, "There's a minerality here, but also a memory of oak from old barrels." Marco's eyes met mine, and his small smile was like the confirmation of a quiet prayer answered. Across the grounds, Daniel was not idle. I saw him through the tent flaps, leaning into a camera, laughing too loud, angling a comment toward a blogger. Lila appeared at his side, and for a moment the festival spun like a carousel, Daniel at its center. Later, a woman from a regional distributor came to me with a business card folded into a note. "We want more," she mouthed. My chest felt briefly like a fist unclenching. But then the first real obstacle walked into my life in the form of a festival volunteer with a clipboard and a thin smile. "We've had a complaint," she said, eyes flicking to the van. "Someone reported a dispute over the provenance of some wines being presented today." My stomach sank. Disputes are the acid of festivals. They dissolve trust. "Who?" I asked. She read from her clipboard. Hale Estates filed a notice alleging trademark infringement and improper use of property associated with their brand. My fingers went cold. Daniel had always been precise with paperwork. He must have anticipated this. I felt the room tilt. "You have documentation?" I asked, my voice measured. "Not yet," she said, "but they want us to hold the samples until resolved." I thought fast. If they held the bottles, if legal counsel intervened, my whole plan would fray like worn rope. I pictured Jonah's face, Marco's hands, the men and women who had trusted me so far. I pictured my father's hands, calloused, steady. "Contact Victor," I said. "Now." He arrived before the volunteer could do anything else, moving like someone who had always been more than a festival director, someone who knew the hidden corridors of power. He read the clipboard, his brow tightening in a way that made me hold my breath. "Mr. Hale," he called across the grounds with a polite firmness. Daniel turned, saw Victor, and for the first time his smile faltered. Victor leaned toward me under the tent. "They sent paperwork," he said quietly. "But we both know the festival is about craft, not lawyers. Give me 10 minutes. 10 minutes felt like a lifetime, but Victor's intervention kept the legal hand at bay. He walked directly to Daniel and spoke with the kind of measured authority you keep for unruly heirs and stubborn vintners. I watched Daniel's jaw work. I felt triumphant and terrified in the same heartbeat. Victor had bought me time, and time was the currency I needed. I used it to move. While Victor distracted the board, I slipped out to the press area, carrying 2 bottles in a crate. I found the blogger who had written the koi piece and handed him an unmarked bottle. "Taste it," I said, "and ask yourself if this is the work of a person who wants to hide." He lifted the glass, sniffed, and took a sip. His face shifted from curiosity to something like reverence. He asked questions, and I answered them without saying my name. I told him about a workshop, an old cooper, a retired winemaker who followed the old methods. I told him about small harvests and the stubbornness of certain rows of vines. He already had the gossip column's appetite for story. I gave him a better story, one that smelled like soil. When I returned, the tensions had ratcheted. Daniel had grown bold. He stepped up to a microphone and made a short theatrical speech about tradition and stewardship, about continuity and family brands. He spoke of legacy like a club to bludgeon critics. The crowd cheered and he posed for photographs. Lila stood beside him, radiant. Then a twist I had not expected. Lila approached my tent while Daniel still spoke and asked to speak privately. Her eyes avoided mine, and there was a tremor in her voice I couldn't place. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I thought he told me things. I don't want to be part of hurting anyone." My heart thudded. Regret is a fragile thing, and I'd always assumed Lila was merely a prop in Daniel's performance. "I didn't want to hurt you," I said, surprising myself with the softness in my tone. She looked at me as if for forgiveness, and then turned away. When she did, someone shouted a name, my name, and the festival shifted like weather. My phone buzzed. An anonymous tip had hit a regional reporter's inbox. Hale Estates warns festival organizers of a fraudulent label trying to profit off their legacy. The reporter's tone was accusatory in text, and faster than I could steady my breath, a camera swung in my direction. Daniel's face was set. He walked toward me slowly, the crowd parting like tied around him. He smiled the smile that used to make me melt, and it looked like armor. "An interesting surprise," he said. "I suppose you intended to make a statement." His voice carried. I could see the cameras taste it. I had a beat, less than a beat, to do something that would either make or break me. So I did the only thing that felt like truth. I picked up a glass, lifted it toward the nearest press, and said, "Taste. Then tell me what you think." It was an invitation and a dare. The world leaned forward. The paper trembled in the officer's hands, but my knees were steadier than they had any right to be. Around me, cameras clicked, pens scribbled, and the crowd's chatter swelled into something closer to a storm. Daniel stood a few feet away, smugness painted across his face like a brand new label. He wanted this. Me cornered, silenced, dragged out before I could even speak. I took the order, scanned the heavy notary stamp, and then set it down carefully on the table. "This is Hale's vineyard?" I asked, loud enough for the nearest journalist to hear. "Then why does the wine in this bottle taste nothing like theirs?" The officer shifted, uncomfortable, as whispers darted through the crowd. Someone muttered, "She's right." I poured. Not for the officer, not for Daniel, but for the press standing nearest. Their notebooks open, their recorders blinking. I filled 3 glasses, slid them across the table. "Tell me," I said, steady, "if this is the same wine you've been drinking under Hale's name." They sipped. Expressions changed. A woman in a red scarf whispered, "This is cleaner, sharper, more depth." A man nodded, writing furiously. The officer hesitated. His job wasn't tasting, it was law. But law bends under the weight of public opinion, and Daniel knew it. His jaw tightened. "Nova," he said, his voice dropping to that faux gentle tone he used when cameras were near. "Stop humiliating yourself. These people don't understand contracts. You've overstepped, and now you'll pay for it." Something inside me cracked. Not from fear, but from clarity. For years, I'd let Daniel define me as the woman behind the books, the woman in the shadows. Now, in front of everyone, I felt myself shedding that skin. "I'm not the one afraid of being tasted," I shot back. The crowd murmured approval. Victor returned then, his presence commanding as always. He lifted the complaint from the officer's hand, scanned it, and with a voice meant to settle storms said, "This order does not apply here. Festival policy dictates disputes are handled off-site. If Mr. Hale wants to file, he may do so in court, but today the wine speaks for itself." A wave of applause rippled. The officer stepped back, grateful to hand the burden to Victor. Daniel's smile cracked like brittle glass. I should have felt victorious, but victory was premature. Because at that moment, Jonah rushed into the tent, pale, breathless. "Nova," he whispered urgently. Someone broke into the van. "Half the crates, they're gone." My stomach dropped. Those bottles were my proof, my chance at leverage. Without them, Ash and Root would seem like a rumor instead of a brand. I forced my voice calm. "Who?" Jonah swallowed. "I didn't see, but they left tire tracks heading toward the main road." Daniel raised an eyebrow, feigning innocence. But I saw the flicker in his eyes, the flicker of a man who thought he'd finally checkmated me. I smiled, slow and deliberate. "It's fine," I told Jonah, though it wasn't. "We still have enough." But in my chest, the storm gathered. Daniel had escalated. He wasn't just playing dirty. He was playing to erase me completely. And if he thought theft and paperwork could stop me, he had no idea what kind of war I was prepared to fight. That night, after the festival closed, I sat in the dim light of the Cooper's workshop with Marco and Jonah. The air smelled of oak and fear. "We've been exposed," Marco said, his voice grave. "He'll come harder now." "Let him," I said. "I've only shown half my hand." Jonah leaned forward. "What do you mean?" I pulled out a small leather-bound book, my father's ledger. Inside were notes not only of yields and barrels, but also of debts paid, favors owed, and names Daniel would rather stay buried. My father had been meticulous. He had tracked every quiet deal that built the vineyard, including the questionable ones Daniel thought no one knew. "This," I said, tapping the book, "is the difference between surviving and winning." Marco looked at me, concern mixing with admiration. If you use this, it won't just ruin him. It'll burn the whole house down. Good, I said. It's time people saw the rot under the wine. The next morning, as sunlight struck the rows of vines like gold fire, I prepared for the next phase. I wasn't just fighting for ashen root anymore. I was fighting to take back my name, my father's legacy, and every drop of respect Daniel had tried to steal. The message burned on my screen like fire under glass. We know about the ledger. Meet tonight alone or it goes public. I stared at it, my thumb hovering above the reply button. Betrayal. The word echoed like a stone dropped in a well. Only 3 people knew about the ledger: me, Marco, and Jonah, which meant either my oldest ally or the young intern I'd taken in had turned against me, or someone had been listening closer than I realized. I didn't answer. Instead, I slipped the phone into my pocket and forced my face neutral. Marco and Jonah were both watching me under the workshop's low light. Who was it? Marco asked. Wrong number, I lied. His eyes narrowed. He'd known me too long to believe that, but he didn't press. Jonah fidgeted, nervous, tapping the table with restless fingers. That night, I drove alone to the rendezvous spot listed in the follow-up message, an abandoned roadside diner just outside St. Helena. The neon sign was long dead, windows boarded, parking lot cracked with weeds. My headlights cut across the dark lot and fell on a single figure standing by the door. Victor. The sight of him jolted me. You, I whispered as I stepped out. He didn't look ashamed. If anything, his face was calm, like someone who had made peace with betrayal long ago. Nova, he said, you've stirred up more than you realize. That ledger, if it goes public, it won't just end Daniel. It'll tear down half the valley. Old families, old debts, men who built this place will burn. Good, I spat. Maybe it's time. He shook his head. No, it'll bury you with them. The Hale name can recover with lawyers and charm, but you, your new label, Ashen Root, will be collateral damage. I crossed my arms. Then why bring me here? Because I want to give you a chance, he said. Hand me the ledger, quietly. I'll make sure it never sees the light, and I'll negotiate peace with Daniel. You'll get to keep your workshop, maybe even a slice of the vineyard profits. For a second, the offer felt like a rope tossed to a drowning woman. But then I remembered Daniel's smirk, Lila's downcast eyes, my father's calloused hands. I remembered what it felt like to be erased. No, I said, not this time. Victor sighed. Then you've chosen war. Before I could answer, headlights swung into the lot, Daniel's car. He stepped out, perfect as ever in a tailored suit, like a man arriving at a gala instead of a midnight blackmail. Nova, he said, voice smooth. This is beneath you. I laughed bitterly. Funny, that's what betrayal always sounds like. Smooth words while the knife twists. Victor raised his hands like a mediator. Both of you need to see reason. But Daniel cut him off. She's already lost. The board's on my side. Her wine will never see shelves. This little rebellion ends tonight. I reached into my coat and pulled out not the ledger, but copies. Photocopies I had made and hidden in plain sight. I held them up, the paper flapping in the night wind. You think you're untouchable, Daniel. These pages tell a different story. Embezzlement, fraud, secret accounts. You built Hale Estates on sand. His face shifted, only slightly, but enough. Victor's calm shattered. Nova, think carefully. If you push this, they'll come after you. Every ally you thought you had will vanish. I stepped closer, voice low but shaking with fury. Let them. I'd rather burn than live erased. Daniel lunged, not at me, but at the papers. He snatched, tore, scattering fragments into the night. But he didn't know I'd already scanned everything, already stored files in places he couldn't touch. I let him rip them. Let him believe for a moment that he'd won. Because the truth wasn't on paper anymore. It was already moving, already seated in inboxes of reporters who owed me favors. Good luck, Daniel, I whispered. By morning, you won't just be a cheat. You'll be a headline. His face drained. Victor looked between us like a man watching a bridge collapse. But as I turned back to my car, my phone buzzed again. A new message. If you go public, we go public too. Ask Jonah what he's hiding. I froze. Jonah? My chest tightened. When I returned to the workshop at dawn, Jonah was waiting by the barrels, pale and restless. He looked up, guilt carved into his face. I'm sorry, he blurted. I didn't mean for it to go this far. The words hit me like a hammer. The betrayal I'd feared was standing right in front of me. Jonah's words hung in the air like smoke in a sealed room. I made a deal with him. For a moment, I didn't move. The workshop smelled of oak and dust, but all I could taste was ash. With Daniel, I asked, my voice quieter than I expected. Jonah nodded, shame pulling his shoulders down. He said, if I passed him information, if I kept him updated, he'd give me a job at Hale Estates. A real job. A career. My stomach twisted. So you sold me out for a paycheck? He winced. It wasn't like that. At first, I just told him small things. When you met with distributors, what wines we were testing. I didn't think it mattered. But then, he wanted more. The ledger, the samples. And I couldn't say no. I laughed, sharp and bitter. Couldn't say no. Jonah, you didn't just betray me. You betrayed yourself. You think Daniel would ever keep his word? You're just another tool to him. Disposable. Tears welled in his eyes. I know. I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Marco stepped forward, fists clenched. We should throw him out, now, before he causes more damage. But I raised my hand. No, he stays. Both of them looked at me like I'd lost my mind. He stays because Daniel thinks Jonah is still useful, which means we can turn this. I walked closer, my voice low and deliberate. Jonah, if you really want forgiveness, you're going to help me feed him lies. Jonah's eyes widened. You want me to spy on him? Yes, I said coldly. You'll tell him exactly what I want him to hear, and when the time comes, you'll help me bury him. The days leading up to the festival's closing ceremony were a blur of tension. Daniel tightened his grip, filing more complaints, whispering to journalists, spinning his narrative of a rogue ex-wife, desperate for attention. But Jonah, now under my eye, became my weapon. Every night, he reported what Daniel asked, and every morning, I crafted answers, false leads, misleading timelines, decoys. Daniel thought he was closing in, but every move he made was a trap I'd laid. Still, the pressure gnawed at me. At night, I lay awake, staring at the rafters of the workshop, wondering if I was any better than him. Manipulating, lying, using a boy who'd already been used. But then I remembered Lila's face, the humiliation in Daniel's smirk, and the roar in my chest burned away the doubt. This wasn't about being better. It was about surviving and winning. On the second to last night of the festival, Rosa called me from San Francisco. Her voice was urgent. Nova, Daniel is hosting a private tasting tomorrow night. High rollers, international buyers. He's going to announce a new reserve line, but I heard whispers it's your wine. He's planning to pass your Ashen Root batches off as his. My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles ached. Stealing my vineyard was one thing. Stealing my creation, the one thing that was mine, that was war. Then we'll stop him, I said. How? Rosa asked. I didn't have an answer yet, but my mind was already moving like wildfire through dry grass. The next day, Marco and I inspected the remaining crates. Only a fraction of the original stock remained. Enough for one bold move, enough for a statement. We could crash his tasting, Marco suggested. Expose him in front of the buyers. Too risky, I said. He'd spin it as desperation. Jonah stepped forward hesitantly. What if we swap the bottles? Both Marco and I turned. Think about it, Jonah said, voice trembling but determined. Daniel wants to serve Ashen Root as his reserve. What if those bottles weren't what he thought they were? What if, in front of everyone, he pours something that ruins him? I stared at him, surprised by the steel in his tone. You'd be willing to do that? After everything? Jonah nodded. I owe you. Let me fix what I broke. That night, under a sliver of moonlight, we loaded the van. Jonah led us toward the Hale storage facility, where Daniel kept crates for the tasting. The air was cold, sharp with anticipation. My heart thudded like a drum. Inside, rows of bottles gleamed under fluorescent light. The Hale crest glared at us from every label. This is it, Jonah whispered. The set for tomorrow. We moved quickly, silent as shadows. Jonah swapped Daniel's reserve bottles with decoys Marco had filled. Harsh, sour blends that tasted like vinegar and regret. Meanwhile, we left just enough Ashen Root hidden where only the right hands would find them. By the time we finished, sweat trickled down my spine despite the cold. As we crept back to the van, I glanced at Jonah. His face was pale, but his jaw was set. For the first time, I believed he might truly be on my side. Back at the workshop, As dawn threatened the horizon, I finally let myself exhale. Tomorrow, Daniel would step onto his stage, certain of victory, and tomorrow he would choke on the taste of his own downfall. The email glared at me from the screen, cruel in its simplicity. A single scanned page, my father's handwriting looping across yellowed paper. At the bottom, my name, Nova Hale, tied to a deal I barely remembered. A shipment signed off under pressure, a financial favor to cover frost damage. Legal then, questionable now. If that page went public, I wouldn't be the betrayed wife fighting for her legacy. I'd be the co-conspirator. Just another Hale tainted by lies. I sank into the workshop chair, the wood creaking beneath me. Marco read over my shoulder, his jaw tightening. "They're setting you up," he muttered. Jonah paced, pale as chalk. It wasn't me this time, I swear. I didn't even know that page existed. I turned to him sharply. "Then who did?" The question gnawed at me. Victor had seen the ledger. Daniel had certainly heard rumors. But someone else had touched it, someone digging deeper than I realized. The next morning, the festival grounds buzzed like a beehive. Everyone whispered about Hale's exclusive reserve tasting that evening. Rumors flew, international distributors were arriving, critics from Paris and London, even a reporter from Wine Spectator. Daniel had pulled out all the stops. And I had a ticking bomb in my inbox. At noon, Rosa called again. "Nova, are you sitting down?" The gossip columns are hinting at dirty Hale secrets. They haven't dropped names yet, but they're circling. "You don't have much time." My throat tightened. "Then we move tonight." Marco frowned. "Too soon, if you step in without proof." "I have proof," I snapped, holding up my phone. "Enough to burn him. But if this page leaks, I go down with him. We have one chance, one stage, tonight." By dusk, the Hale estate glowed like a palace. Lanterns lined the courtyard, violins played under the canopy, and Daniel stood at the center, radiant in his false kingdom. Lila hovered nearby, her smile brittle, her eyes darting as if searching for exits. I watched from the crowd, ashen root tucked safely in a black case by my side. My heart thudded in rhythm with the music. Tonight wasn't about revenge anymore. It was survival. Victor spotted me first. His face was unreadable, polished as the glassware around us. He didn't approach, but his gaze lingered. Warning or threat, I couldn't tell. Jonah whispered at my elbow. "The swapped bottles are in place. If he pours, he's finished." "Good," I said, though my palms were damp. Daniel raised his glass to command silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice smooth as velvet. "Tonight you taste history, a reserve that embodies Hale's legacy." He gestured, and a server uncorked the first bottle. One of our decoys. The sharp scent drifted even before the pour hit glasses. The first sip told the story. A distributor from France coughed, face twisted. A critic shook her head, disgust flickering across her features. Whispers turned to laughter, muffled at first, then sharper. Daniel blinked, confused, then furious. He grabbed a glass himself, took a sip, and nearly choked. The crowd erupted. Phones flashed. Cameras caught every grimace. I stepped forward then, my voice slicing through the noise. "Funny," I said, projecting calm. "That doesn't taste like Hale, but maybe it tastes like the lies he built this vineyard on." All eyes turned. I reached into the black case and lifted a single bottle of ashen root, its label simple, stark, undeniable. "This," I said, uncorking it myself, "is the true wine of this valley. My father's vines, my work, my legacy." The silence was electric. I poured, passed glasses into eager hands. The reaction was immediate. Eyes widened, nods spread like wildfire, murmurs of praise layered over each other. Daniel staggered, cornered. "She's nothing," he snapped, pointing at me. "She's a bitter woman with forged papers and—" "Enough," another voice cut him off. "Lila." She stepped forward, trembling but resolute. "I can't do this anymore. He's lying. He's been lying to all of you. And he tried to steal her wine to cover it." Gasps rippled. Cameras swung to catch every word. Daniel's face drained of color. But before I could savor the moment, a vibration buzzed in my pocket. Another message from the anonymous sender. "Enjoy the stage, Nova. After tonight, the world learns your part in the Hale fraud, too." My blood went cold. The applause echoed long after the glasses were emptied. But all I could hear was the silent tick of doom in my pocket. That email, the page from the ledger, Was a knife pressed against my throat? Reporters swarmed, shoving recorders toward me, shouting questions about Ashen Root, about Hale, about betrayal. I smiled, I poured, I answered carefully. On the outside, I was the woman who had just dethroned her husband. On the inside, I was the woman dangling above the same abyss. That night, back in the workshop, the celebration felt hollow. Marco raised a glass. Jonah sat silent, chewing his guilt. "They'll come for me next," I admitted finally, setting my phone on the table. The screen still showed the threat. "After tonight, the world learns your part." Marco frowned. "That page proves nothing. A single signature under pressure? You were covering for your family." "The truth doesn't matter," I said. "The headline does. Nova Hale complicit in fraud. That's all it takes." Jonah looked up suddenly. "Then fight the headline before it fights you." I blinked. "What do you mean?" "Tell it yourself," he said, "before they twist it. You don't hide the ledger, you expose it on your terms. You make yourself the whistleblower, not the villain." His words hit me hard. Could I? Could I turn my own weapon on myself and still win? The next morning, I called Rosa. She agreed to set up a private dinner with a handful of influential journalists, the ones who still valued integrity over scandal. "You'll get one shot," she warned. "If you fumble, they'll shred you." That night, I stood in the candlelight of a San Francisco restaurant, my father's ledger on the table in front of me. Pages yellowed, edges soft from years of turning. "This is our history," I began, voice steady. "It holds the good and the bad." My father tracked every deal, every compromise. Some of it saved the vineyard. Some of it should never have happened. I flipped to the damning page. My name, my signature, the secret I'd carried. Yes, I signed this. I signed it when frost threatened to wipe out our crop. I signed it to save workers' jobs, to keep families fed. But Daniel turned survival into strategy. He built a business model on it, and I won't let him bury me with his corruption. The journalists scribbled, cameras recorded. For the first time, I didn't flinch at exposure. I welcomed it. The next day, headlines bloomed like wildfire. Nova Hale breaks. Silence. Hale Estate's dark secrets revealed. From betrayed wife to whistleblower. Ashen Root. The rebirth of Napa's truth. Daniel's lawyers scrambled, issuing denials, but the evidence was already moving. Contracts, recordings, witnesses, all pieces I'd planted, surfaced alongside my confession. The narrative was clear. Daniel was the architect of fraud. I was the survivor who refused to be erased. But even as the tide turned, I knew it wasn't over. Victor hadn't shown his hand. Someone else still had copies. Someone wanted more than Daniel's ruin. They wanted mine. That evening, I found an envelope slid under the workshop door. No address. No sender. Inside was another ledger page, this one doctored to implicate me deeper, showing payments I never authorized. A note scrawled across it. "The Valley doesn't forgive. Run while you can." My hands shook. Marco grabbed the page, studied it, then slammed it down. "Forgery. Sloppy, but dangerous." Jonah muttered, "Victor, it has to be. He's protecting the old families." Maybe, but I knew something else. The war wasn't just Daniel's anymore. The Valley itself, the power structures, the moneyed dynasties, had decided I was a threat. I looked at Marco, at Jonah, at the bottles of Ashen Root lined like soldiers behind me. "Then we don't run," I said. "We finish this." The courthouse in San Francisco smelled of polished wood and old battles. Reporters crowded the steps, shouting questions as I walked up the stairs. Flashes burst like fireworks. My hands clenched around the leather handle of my briefcase, where copies of my father's ledger lay waiting. Inside, the courtroom buzzed. Daniel sat at the plaintiff's table in a crisp suit, his posture relaxed, as though this were another stage for his charm. Victor sat behind him, stone-faced, prepared to testify. Their alliance was a dagger aimed at my heart. Marco squeezed my shoulder before I took my seat. "Remember, Nova, you have the truth. That's stronger than their lies." But truth felt fragile under the weight of law. The opening statements were brutal. Daniel's lawyer painted me as a bitter ex-wife, lashing out, accusing me of stealing wine, forging documents, and trying to burn down Hale Estates out of spite. They waved the doctored ledger page like a banner, my name scrawled across fake payments. When it was my lawyer's turn, she stood tall. "This case isn't about bitterness. It's about theft. It's about fraud. and it's about a man who tried to erase the very woman who built his empire. She gestured to me. Nova Hale is not here to destroy Hale Estates. She's here to expose the rot at its roots. The jury shifted, listening. Hope flickered. Then came the witnesses. Distributors, sommeliers, workers. Some swore loyalty to Daniel, their words rehearsed, their eyes sliding toward him like moths to a flame. Others spoke cautiously in my favor, remembering debts, kindnesses, nights when I stood in the frost to save the vines. Finally, Victor took the stand. His voice was steady, his words chosen like sharpened knives. "The ledger is real," he said. "I've seen it myself." And while Daniel made mistakes, Nova was complicit. She signed deals, she looked away, she allowed it to happen. His testimony sliced through me. Gasps rose from the gallery. Daniel smirked, certain he had won. But I wasn't done. When it was my turn, I rose. My hands didn't shake as I carried my father's ledger to the stand. "Yes," I said, projecting my voice. "I signed a page. I signed to save families from losing their homes in a frost year. But I will not let them twist necessity into corruption." I flipped the book to another section, one I had kept hidden until now. Pages of Daniel's handwriting, proof of secret accounts, bribes, manipulated contracts. This is his signature. This is his fraud. And Victor knew. Gasps again. Daniel's face drained. Victor's lips pressed thin. The judge called for order. My lawyer pressed the point, hammering Daniel's pattern of deceit. The jury's pens scribbled furiously. During recess, I sat on the courthouse bench, heart pounding. Jonah slipped into the hall, pale but determined. He handed me a USB drive. "What's this?" I asked. "Insurance," he whispered. Recordings of Daniel's calls. He told me everything when he thought I was still on his side. I stared at him, stunned. "Why give this to me now?" "Because I need to make it right," Jonah said. "And because if I don't, he wins." My throat tightened. I took the drive, the weight of betrayal and redemption heavy in my palm. Back in court, the recordings played. Daniel's voice filled the room, arrogant and damning. "Erase her. Take her out of the vineyard. We'll pass her wine as ours. By the time she realizes, she'll have nothing left." The jury froze. The judge's gavel cracked for silence. Daniel's lawyer buried his face in his hands. It was the moment the tide turned. But even as Daniel crumbled, I saw Victor's eyes lock on me. Cold, calculating. This wasn't over. The words followed me long after Victor's car disappeared into the night. "The valley will not let you live with its secrets." I lay awake in the farmhouse, staring at the ceiling beams, the air thick with the scent of harvest and fear. Outside, the vines stood silent in the moonlight, rows of soldiers waiting for their general. But I no longer knew if I was commanding an army or walking into execution. By morning, the papers were ablaze. Headlines crowned me as the woman who had taken down her husband. But buried beneath the praise were darker whispers. Old families questioning whether ash and root should even exist. Whispers of betrayal of Napa traditions. Victor's words were already spreading. Rosa arrived mid-morning, heels clicking against the wooden floor of the workshop. She dropped a folder thick with documents onto the table. "They've formed a coalition," she said grimly. "Victor's pulling strings with the old estates. They're lobbying to have ash and root barred from distribution in Napa. They claim you violated regional integrity codes." I frowned. "Integrity? These people have been cheating for decades." "They don't care about truth," Rosa said. "They care about control, and they've decided you're dangerous." Marco cursed under his breath. Jonah sat hunched, guilt still painted on his face. "So what do we do?" I asked. Rosa's eyes narrowed. "We fight fire with fire. You've exposed Daniel. Now you expose the valley." The idea terrified me. This wasn't just revenge on one man. This was declaring war on an entire dynasty. But something in me shifted. I was tired of playing defense. That evening, I called a press conference at the vineyard. Cameras lined the courtyard, the same space where I'd once hosted harvest dinners with Daniel. Now, the lights burned hot, ready to record whatever truth I offered. I stepped to the microphone, the ledger in one hand, a bottle of ashen root in the other. "My name is Nova Hale," I began, "and I have been threatened, betrayed, and erased by the very people who claim to uphold Napa's traditions. But tonight, I will show you what tradition really looks like." I opened the ledger, flipping page by page. payments to politicians, secret land grabs, fires written off as acts of God when they were convenient accidents. Every page was a wound, and every wound was theirs. Gasps rippled, reporters scribbled. The valley's dark heart was bleeding in public. "This land does not belong to corruption," I said, voice hard. "It belongs to the vines, to the workers, to the families who pour their lives into every bottle. Ashen Root is not the end of Napa. It's its rebirth." The crowd erupted. Cheers, applause. The floodgates opened. But victory was never clean. As I left the stage, my phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown number. "Truth cuts both ways. You think you've won? Wait until you see tomorrow's paper." Sleep escaped me that night. At dawn, the headline hit. "Nova Hale's hands not clean. Evidence surfaces of her role in vineyard scandal." The doctored pages. Victor had moved faster than I expected. Reporters swarmed the vineyard gates. Investors called in panic. For every cheer, there was now a jeer. I stood at the edge of the vines, the cool morning mist curling around me. My chest burned with rage, but my spine stayed steel. "They want a war," I whispered. "Then they'll get one." Marco looked at me, eyes full of worry. "Nova, how far are you willing to take this?" I met his gaze. "As far as it takes. If I burn, I'll burn with fire bright enough to light the valley." The Polaroid photo sat on my desk, its edges curling under the weight of my grip. My 16-year-old self, smiling beside my father, now defaced by the words, "Your legacy ends with you." I'd faced Daniel's betrayal. I'd faced Victor's testimony. But this was different. This was a message from the valley itself, a reminder that I was not just fighting one man, but an empire. Marco paced behind me, fists clenched. "They're threatening you directly now. We should take this to the police." I shook my head. "The police? Half their pensions are tied to vineyard money. This threat wasn't meant to scare me into running to the law. It was meant to warn me, play nice or get buried." Jonah swallowed hard. "So what do we do?" I turned the photo over in my hand, staring at the blank back. "We don't play nice." That afternoon, I called Rosa. "It's time," I told her. "Leak the rest." "Nova, are you sure?" Rosa's voice crackled with urgency. "If you release everything, you'll burn the valley to the ground. Even the families that stayed neutral will come after you." I closed my eyes, picturing the vines stretching out, my father's calloused hands guiding mine as a child. If their survival depends on corruption, then let them come. The next 48 hours were chaos. Documents appeared online, contracts, secret payments, property transfers. Rosa and her contacts in the press made sure they spread like wildfire. Each headline hit harder than the last. Old Napa families exposed in widespread fraud. Ashen Root founder unveils dark side of the valley. Hale legacy tied to decades of corruption. Wine shops pulled Hale bottles from their shelves. Distributors froze contracts. Buyers demanded answers. The dynasty was unraveling. But so was I. The threats escalated. Anonymous calls in the middle of the night. Cars idling too long at the end of my driveway. Workers whispering that maybe I'd gone too far. The vineyard no longer felt like home. It felt like a fortress under siege. On the third night, Marco burst into the workshop, face pale. "Nova, they torched one of the outer storage barns." My stomach dropped. "Any injuries?" "No, but the message is clear." I rushed outside. The horizon glowed orange, smoke curling into the sky. The barn was gone, a warning written in fire. Jonah stood beside me, tears in his eyes. "This is my fault. I started all of this by giving Daniel information. If I hadn't..." I grabbed his arm. "Stop. This isn't on you anymore. This is bigger than all of us." He nodded, but his guilt didn't fade. That night, as I sat alone in the farmhouse, another message slid under the door. A single sheet of paper with 3 words. "Leave or burn." I held it in my trembling hands, rage rising hotter than the flames outside. For a moment, I thought of surrender, of leaving Napa behind, starting over with Ashen Root somewhere safe. But then I heard my father's voice in my memory. "The vines don't run, Nova. They dig deeper." I stood, spine straightening. They wanted me out. They'd have to drag me out, root by root. The courthouse felt different this time. Bigger, heavier. It wasn't just Daniel across the aisle. It was Victor, flanked by lawyers in $1,000 suits, and backed by dynasties that had ruled Napa for generations. The petition was clear: seize ashen root under claims of fraudulent foundation, and threat to the integrity of the region. If they won, my vineyard, my name, even the bottles stacked in my cellar would be stripped away. I sat at the defense table, my fingers tracing the grain of the wood, forcing myself to breathe. Marco sat behind me, arms crossed like a sentinel. Jonah hovered close, still desperate to prove his loyalty. Rosa leaned in, whispering, "This is it, Nova. We either end them, or they end you." Victor rose first. His voice was smooth, calculated. The valley is more than vines. It is tradition, integrity, honor. And Nova Hale, through reckless exposure of selective documents and her own complicit actions, has endangered the reputation of us all. Ashen root is not a vineyard. It is a weapon she wields to destroy. His words rolled through the courtroom like thunder. The gallery nodded, murmuring agreement. He wasn't just arguing law, he was selling fear. When it was my turn, I stood slowly, my palms sweated. But my voice rang clear. Victor speaks of honor, yet honor does not hide in ledgers of bribes. Honor does not burn barns to send threats. Honor does not erase women who built the land with their bare hands. I held up my father's ledger. Yes, there are pages with my name. I've never hidden them. I signed to save families during frost, when survival was the only choice. But look closer, and you'll see who turned necessity into corruption. I flipped the book open, revealing more pages. Contracts Victor himself had signed years ago. Deals with developers, manipulations that funneled land into his pocket. Gasps rippled. This isn't about one vineyard, I continued. It's about dynasties who think they own the valley. Well, the valley doesn't belong to them. It belongs to the vines, and to the people who keep them alive. The courtroom buzzed. Reporters scribbled. Victor's face tightened, but he didn't falter. Lies, he spat. Forgeries. Then Jonah stood. My heart jumped. He wasn't supposed to speak. Your Honor, Jonah said, voice trembling but strong. I worked under both of them. I saw Daniel's schemes. And I heard Victor threaten Nova. He said she'd never walk away alive with the valley's secrets. I recorded it. A ripple of shock swept the room. Jonah held up his phone, screen glowing with files. The judge demanded playback. Victor's voice filled the chamber, low and venomous. She may win against Daniel, but the valley will bury her. She will not survive this war. The gallery erupted. Reporters surged. The judge banged the gavel until silence fell again. Victor's mask cracked. For the first time, I saw panic in his eyes. By the end of the day, the petition was dismissed. Ashen root was safe. But more than that, the court ordered a full investigation into the dynasty's practices. Outside, cameras flashed as I stood on the courthouse steps. This isn't just about me, I told them. This is about truth. And truth doesn't burn. It grows. The crowd cheered. For a moment, I felt light again. The SUV's headlights glared like predator eyes in my rearview mirror. The road from San Francisco to Napa wound through dark hills, silent except for the hum of engines. Every time I accelerated, the SUV matched me. Every time I slowed, it stayed close. They weren't hiding. They wanted me to know. My knuckles whitened around the steering wheel. I thought of Marco's warning, Jonah's guilt, Rosa's determination. If they silenced me tonight, all of it, all the fights, all the truths, would end in a ditch. I forced myself calm. Fear feeds them. Control starves them. At the next bend, I pulled off into a gas station, its neon buzzing faintly in the night. The SUV slowed, idled on the shoulder, waiting, watching. I filled my tank with hands that didn't shake. When I turned, 2 men leaned against the SUV, their faces shadowed, but their posture clear. Intimidation. One flicked a cigarette into the gravel. The other tapped something metal against the door. I didn't go to them. I walked straight into the station, bought a bottle of water, and made sure the clerk saw me dial a number on my phone. Then I stepped back outside and spoke loudly, as if to someone on the line. Yes, Sheriff, I've got their plates. Sending now. The cigarette dropped. The metal tapping stopped. Within seconds, the SUV peeled away, tires spitting gravel. I exhaled, shaking only after the taillights disappeared. They hadn't been ready to kill me, not yet. They just wanted me afraid. But fear was a luxury I couldn't afford anymore. Back at the vineyard, Marco waited, pacing. Jonah jumped up when I entered, panic in his eyes. They followed you, didn't they? Marco asked. Yes, I said. And they'll keep coming. This isn't intimidation, it's escalation. Rosa arrived an hour later, heels clicking like gunshots on the floorboards. She dropped another folder on the table. Victor's moving faster than we thought. He's organizing a private summit tomorrow. Old estates, politicians, bankers. If they unify, they'll crush Ashen Root before it even breathes. I opened the folder. Names, donors, judges, even members of the press. It wasn't a vineyard, it was a machine. Jonah whispered, "How do we fight that?" I stared at the vines outside, silver under moonlight. By making them choke on their own machine. The next day, I stood outside the Hale estate gates, cameras rolling. My voice was steady, even as my pulse raced. These men want to erase me, I told the press. They want to erase truth. But I won't vanish quietly. Tomorrow, I'll release every page, every name, every transaction that shows how deep the corruption runs. Not just Daniel, not just Victor, all of them. The reporters erupted with questions. Flashes exploded. The dynasties watching from their windows heard the declaration. It wasn't just a battle anymore. It was war, in full daylight. That night, Marco poured us each a glass of Ashen Root. The three of us, him, Jonah, and me, sat at the farmhouse table, weary but unbroken. To survival, Marco said. To truth, I added. Jonah hesitated, then lifted his glass. To forgiveness. The clink echoed in the quiet. For a brief moment, I believed we might endure. The rock and its jagged warning sat on the farmhouse table between us like a live grenade. Last chance. Stop, or the vines burn next. The silence stretched until Marco slammed his fist down. That's it? We can't wait for them to make good on this. We need to guard the vineyard tonight. I looked out the shattered window. The vines swayed in the night breeze, silver under the moonlight, delicate but strong. My father always said they were like people, resilient if tended, but fragile if left undefended. Now they felt like children, and I their only guardian. We split shifts, I said. No fire gets within 100 yards. Jonah swallowed hard. And if they come with more than fire, I met his gaze. Then they'll learn I don't burn easily. The night stretched long. Marco patrolled the southern rows with a lantern. Jonah kept watch by the barn, his shoulders hunched but eyes sharp. I stayed near the farmhouse, scanning the hills for headlights. Hours crawled, crickets chirped, the smell of earth thickened, and then movement. A flicker of light at the edge of the north vineyard. Small but growing. "Marco!" I shouted, sprinting across the rows. The lantern bobbed as he ran to meet me. Flames licked the dry grass, fed by the night wind. Someone had tossed a Molotov. Marco smothered it with a blanket, stamping out embers. But another flame rose 20 yards away, then another. Shadows darted through the vines. Multiple attackers. "Jonah!" I screamed. "Cut them off." He bolted from the barn, wielding a shovel like a weapon. The shadows scattered, retreating toward a waiting truck at the fence line. One of them turned long enough to hurl another bottle, shattering near my feet, fire splashing across the soil. The heat seared my skin, but adrenaline kept me moving. I grabbed a bucket from the irrigation trench, doused the flames, coughing in the smoke. By the time the last fire was smothered, the attackers were gone, their truck tearing down the dirt road. We stood in the charred rows, sweat dripping, lungs burning. The vines around us hissed and smoked but held. They wanted to scare us, Marco growled. Next time, they won't stop at scare tactics. Jonah doubled over, breathless. They're going to keep coming. We can't fight fire with shovels forever. I looked at the blackened earth, the vines singed but alive. No, next time, we fight with something stronger. At dawn, Rosa arrived, her face pale at the sight of the damage. They've crossed a line, she said. If the public hears about this, the dynasties lose their last shred of legitimacy. But you have to decide, Nova. Do you want to expose this now, or hold it as a final weapon? I hesitated. The strategist in me knew Rosa was right. Timing mattered, but the woman inside me, the daughter, the farmer, burned with fury. They had tried to destroy my vines, my family, my legacy. We expose it, I said. Now, let the world see the fire they started. By midday, photos of the scorched vineyard rows were everywhere. Headlines screamed, "Arson attack at Ashen Root. Dynasty war in Napa escalates." The valley was no longer whispering, it was roaring. But as the attention mounted, so did the danger. That evening, as I walked the rows, My phone buzzed with a new message. We warned you, the next fire will not stop. I stared at the glowing screen, the vines stretching endlessly around me, and felt the war closing in. The engines grew louder, a chorus of steel and menace rolling through the valley. Headlights cut across the rows of vines like blades. 3, maybe 4 trucks, barreling straight toward the vineyard gates. Marco ran to meet me at the porch, a shotgun slung over his shoulder. They're coming in heavy. Jonah stumbled out of the barn, clutching a crowbar, fear and guilt warring on his face. We can't stop them all. We don't have to stop them all, I said, my voice hard. We just have to make them fail. The truck skidded to a stop just beyond the fence. Doors slammed. Shadows spilled out. Half a dozen men in dark jackets, carrying cans of fuel and bottles stuffed with rags. One shouted, "This is your last warning, Hale. Walk away or the vines burn tonight." I stepped forward, heart pounding but voice steady. "You already tried fire. The vines lived, and so will I." The man sneered, flicking a lighter open and closed. "Then you'll burn with them." The first bottle arced through the air. Time slowed. The glass spun, flame trailing, aiming for the heart of the vineyard. But Marco raised the shotgun, fired, and the bottle exploded midair, raining sparks harmlessly into the dirt. Chaos erupted. Shouts, flames. The attackers charged the fence. Jonah swung his crowbar, catching one across the shoulder. Marco reloaded, steady as stone. I grabbed a shovel from the porch and swung with everything I had, knocking another man back into the dirt. My lungs burned from smoke, my ears rang from gunfire, but my resolve was sharper than fear. This was my land, my legacy. They would not take it. Police sirens wailed in the distance, faint but growing. The attackers heard it too. Panic spread. They hurled one last bottle into the vines, but this time Jonah was faster. He caught it with his shovel, flinging it aside before it could ignite. The men scrambled back to their trucks, engines roaring as they peeled into the night. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of dying flames and the pant of our breaths. The vineyard was scarred but standing, alive. Marco lowered the shotgun, sweat streaking his face. That was too close. Jonah dropped the crowbar, his hands trembling. I thought I was going to run, but then I remembered, if I ran, I'd lose you. Both of you. I pulled them close, my chest heaving. We're not broken yet, and as long as the vines stand, neither am I. At dawn, the vineyard bore its scars, blackened earth, charred posts, but the majority of the vines still reached for the sky, green and unyielding. Reporters arrived by mid-morning, cameras capturing the wreckage. I stood among the rows, ash on my skin, fire still in my eyes. "This is what they've done," I told them, holding up a charred shard of glass. "They tried to erase me, but every time they light a fire, they only expose their fear." The cameras flashed. The valley was listening. Rosa's words sank into me like ice water. Victor is meeting with international investors. For weeks I had fought to keep Ashen Root alive in Napa. But if Victor secured global backers, the war would outgrow the valley. He wouldn't just erase me. He'd bury me under the weight of the world's money. I stared at the scorched vineyard outside the window. The vines stretched stubbornly into the dawn, green tips pushing through blackened soil. They reminded me of myself, scarred, but not surrendering. Marco broke the silence. If he's going global, we need proof strong enough to travel just as far. Something that no amount of money can drown. Jonah leaned forward. Then we go after his empire directly. Not the vines, not the bottles, the books. Find the fraud he buried overseas. The plan formed faster than I expected. Rosa's contacts tracked Victor to a hotel in San Francisco, where he was scheduled to meet a syndicate of European distributors. We couldn't stop the meeting, but we could expose what he was selling. That night, disguised in a black jacket and cap, I slipped into the hotel with Rosa. Jonah fed us intel from a van parked nearby, hacking into the hotel's security feed. Marco stayed close, a silent shadow ready to act if things went bad. Victor's suite was on the top floor. Rosa whispered, 2 guards outside. If we trip the alarm, we're done. But luck, or maybe fate, was on our side. The guards left briefly, summoned by a call to the lobby. Jonah's doing. We slipped in. Inside, the suite was lavish, littered with contracts and laptops. Victor's arrogance was his weakness. He believed no one would dare touch him. I rifled through papers, my heart hammering. Offshore accounts, fake shell companies, deals stretching to Asia, Europe, the Middle East. Evidence of a dynasty laundering billions under the guise of wine. This is it, I whispered. This isn't just corruption. This is a criminal empire. But then the door opened. Victor stepped inside, flanked by two suited men, his eyes locked on me instantly, calm, cold. Well, he said smoothly, if it isn't Napa's martyr. Rosa froze. Marco tensed behind me. I clutched the ledger page in my hand, but Victor didn't flinch. You think this ends in a courtroom? He asked. It ends with power, and power, Nova, is what you'll never have. He nodded once. The suited men moved forward. The room erupted. Marco lunged, shoving one into the wall. Rosa smashed a vase, swinging it at the other. I bolted for the door, clutching the folder of evidence. Victor grabbed my arm, his grip like iron. You're finished, he hissed. I met his gaze, rage boiling through me. No, you are. I drove my knee into his chest, breaking free, and sprinted into the hallway. Marco and Rosa followed, bruised but alive. We raced down stairwells, alarms blaring behind us. By the time we reached the street, Jonah had the van ready. We dove inside as the hotel lights flared, Victor's men spilling out in pursuit. But we had the evidence. Back at the farmhouse, I spread the documents across the table. Offshore accounts, illegal trades, international laundering networks. Rosa stared, wide-eyed. This isn't just a Napa scandal, she breathed. This could topple governments. Jonah looked at me, pale. Nova, if we release this, they won't just come for your vineyard. They'll come for your life. I looked at the vines outside, still standing after fire, smoke, and storms. My chest tightened, but my voice was steady. Then let them come. I've spent too long being erased. Now I'll write the ending myself. The threat glowed on my phone screen like an open wound. Release it, and you won't live to see harvest. I set the phone down on the table, the farmhouse thick with silence. Marco's jaw was clenched tight, his hand resting near the shotgun propped against the wall. Jonah sat hunched forward, pale, his fingers tapping anxiously against his knee. Rosa paced, heels clicking like a clock running out of time. This is it, she said. Victor knows you have enough to bring his empire down. He'll strike before you can move. I picked up the ledger page again, my father's handwriting tangled with Victor's corrupt deals. My chest tightened. If I don't release this, they win. If I do, I might not live long enough to see the valley free. Marco spoke first, his voice low and steady. Then we plan like farmers, not fighters. Farmers know patience, timing. If you plant too early, the frost kills. Too late, the sun burns. You wait for the moment the soil is ready. Jonah swallowed. And when's that moment? I looked out the window. The vineyard shimmered under the morning light, green pushing through scars of blackened soil. Soon, very soon. That afternoon, Rosa arranged a meeting with a handful of trusted journalists. Not the ones chasing clickbait, but the ones who still believed in truth. We gathered in the old tasting room, its walls lined with bottles of Hale wine I no longer claimed. I laid the evidence on the table, contracts, bank transfers, offshore accounts. This is everything, I told them. The dynasties have built their empires on blood and bribes. The world deserves to know. One journalist, a woman with gray streaks in her hair, leaned forward. Nova, if you publish this, you'll be hunted. These people don't forgive. I met her gaze. I don't need forgiveness. I need justice. Pens scribbled, cameras recorded. The story began to move. That night, headlights swept across the vineyard again. But this time, it wasn't attackers. It was allies. Dozens of local workers, neighbors, even rival winemakers arrived, carrying lanterns and torches. We heard what they tried to do, one man said, his voice rough with anger. This land deserves better. We're here to stand with you. The sight stole my breath. For the first time, the vineyard wasn't just defended by 3 weary souls. It was guarded by a community. Jonah whispered, almost in disbelief. They came. They came because they believe, I said. Not in me, in the truth. But just as hope flickered, Rosa's phone rang. Her face went pale as she listened. She hung up slowly, eyes wide. Victor's next move, she said. He's not just fighting in Napa anymore. He's already secured deals in Europe and Asia. If he spins this right, he'll frame you as the villain and himself as the savior restoring order. My stomach dropped. So even if I burn him here, He rises abroad. Rosa nodded grimly. Unless you take the fight to him first. I walked into the vineyard, the night wind tugging at my hair, the vines whispering around me like witnesses. I thought of my father's voice, steady and sure. The vines don't run. They dig deeper. I clenched the folder in my hands. Then we dig deeper. We don't just expose him here. We take this story to the world. The video looped on my phone, the whisper clawing at my nerves. The vines won't be standing tomorrow. I replayed it again and again, as if some detail might change, as if the threat might turn out to be a bluff. But it wasn't a bluff. The voice was steady, confident, a promise. Marco slammed his hand against the table. We don't wait this time. If they say tomorrow, they mean tonight. Jonah shifted uneasily, his voice low. Then we need help. Real help. This isn't a fight we can win with shotguns and shovels. Rosa exhaled slowly. I've already made some calls. The journalists you spoke to? They're bringing national outlets, cameras, crews. By sunrise, the world will be watching this vineyard. If Victor tries anything, it won't be in the shadows. We spent the night preparing, lanterns strung along the rows, buckets of water and hoses ready. Workers from neighboring vineyards showed up with trucks, tools, even their children, faces hard with determination. It felt less like a farm and more like a fortress. I walked the rows, touching the leaves as I passed. You've survived frost, drought, and fire, I whispered to the vines. Now survive greed. At 3 a.m., the sound came. Engines again. Headlights cresting the hill. But this time, when the trucks roared down, they weren't met with silence. They were met with floodlights, cameras, and dozens of voices shouting. Reporters surged forward, filming everything. Workers stood shoulder to shoulder, blocking the rows with their bodies. Marco raised his shotgun, not at the men, but high in the air, firing once. The crack echoed like a warning bell. The attackers froze. They hadn't expected witnesses. They hadn't expected resistance. I stepped forward, my voice loud enough to carry. You tried to burn me, you tried to bury me, but the world sees you now, and you will not erase me again. The men hesitated. Then, one by one, they dropped their fuel cans and retreated to their trucks. Engines snarled, but their power was gone. They weren't wolves in the dark anymore. They were cowards in the light. The crowd erupted, cheering, clapping, weeping. Reporters swarmed me, shoving microphones forward. What's next, Nova? One asked. I held up the folder of evidence. Next? We take this beyond Napa. We take it global. Victor thought he could hide in shadows. Now we drag him into daylight. By dawn, the footage of the failed attack was already streaming worldwide. Clips of the workers standing guard. Shots of Molotovs abandoned in the dirt. My words, broadcast across networks. You will not erase me again. The public turned. Support poured in. Letters, donations, promises of protection. Ashen Root wasn't just a vineyard anymore. It was a movement. But Rosa's face remained tense. Victor won't stop here, she warned. If he's desperate, he'll strike harder. He has money, reach, men who don't care about cameras. Be ready. I looked out over the vines, the morning sun washing them in gold. Let him come, I whispered. The vines stand. So do I. The boarding pass lay on the table, its white paper glowing under the farmhouse lamp. San Francisco, Geneva. First class. One way. I turned it over in my hands again and again. Victor was luring me out of Napa. Or maybe daring me to follow. Either way, the message was clear. If I wanted to stop him, I couldn't do it from the vines. Marco stood at the window, arms crossed. It's a trap, you know that. Of course it's a trap, I said. But traps work both ways. Rosa leaned forward, eyes sharp. If you go, we go. Victor isn't just playing local politics anymore. He's courting international banks, shipping moguls, people who could bankroll him beyond our reach. If you don't cut this at the root, Napa won't matter. He'll control everything. Jonah's voice trembled. But if you leave, what if they burn the vines while you're gone? I looked out at the vineyard, its leaves trembling in the night breeze. The vines survived fire. They'll survive again. But if I don't go to Geneva, there won't be a future for them at all. 3 days later, I was on the plane. The engines hummed like a warning. Marco sat beside me, stone-faced, while Rosa worked her phone relentlessly, feeding intel to journalists. Jonah had stayed behind, sworn to protect the vineyard with the workers. Over the Atlantic, I pressed my forehead to the window. The stars stretched infinite across the black. My father's voice echoed in memory. Sometimes the vines need more than water. Sometimes they need you to fight for the soil itself. I whispered into the glass, "I'm fighting, Dad." Geneva was glitter and glass. Lakeside towers reflecting wealth like armor. Victor was here, somewhere in the city, weaving his empire. Rosa's contacts traced him to an exclusive business summit, an event cloaked as a wine innovation conference, but in truth a gathering of global financiers hungry for influence. Marco adjusted his jacket. They'll expect suits and speeches. What they won't expect is you. We walked into the hotel ballroom, chandeliers blazing, tables dressed in white linen. I could feel eyes on me instantly. Whispers, the American widow, the scandal of Napa. Victor stood near the stage, a glass of Bordeaux in his hand, his smile smooth as poison. He didn't flinch when he saw me. He welcomed me. "Ah," he said, lifting his glass. "The phoenix of Napa, come to burn again." I kept my voice level. "No, I came to watch you fall." I handed Rosa the folder. She slipped it to the journalist we'd invited under cover. Cameras hidden in bags clicked silently. Victor stepped onto the stage, his voice amplified across the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, Napa is in chaos. But chaos is opportunity. Together we can create an order that transcends borders, built on heritage, power, and trust." Trust. The word curdled in my ears. I moved to the front, lifting my father's ledger high. Trust? My voice cut across the ballroom. Trust built on lies, theft, and blood money. Gasps. Cameras swung toward me. Victor's smile tightened. "Careful, Nova. You're far from home." "Exactly," I said. "Which means your reach has an end, and I've just dragged you into the light." I flipped the ledger open, revealing his offshore signatures, his global fraud. The journalists surged, snapping photos, recording everything. Victor's mask cracked. His glass shattered on the floor. The ballroom was chaos. Investors storming out, journalists flooding Victor's stage with cameras, murmurs thick as smoke. But Victor was already gone, slipped into the Geneva night like a snake through grass. Marco touched my arm. "We should leave, before his men regroup." Rosa shook her head. "No, this is when we strike hardest. We don't let the story scatter, we feed it. The press is here, the world is watching. Nova, you need to speak now." My throat was raw, but I climbed onto the stage where Victor had stood. The microphone squealed before steadying. I held up the ledger. "This is not just a Napa story," I said, my voice cutting through the chaos. "This is a global story. Victor and his allies have stolen billions, laundered through vineyards, hidden behind tradition. They call it heritage. I call it corruption." Flashes erupted, pens scribbled. I saw Rosa's small nod from the crowd. "I am not here to destroy wine," I continued, "but to save it. Wine is soil, labor, family, honesty. Ashen root stands for truth. And if that truth costs me everything, so be it." Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then thunderous. For the first time, the ledger wasn't just evidence, it was a weapon wielded in daylight. By morning, headlines blazed worldwide. Napa widow exposes global wine laundering empire. Victor de Montclair under fire after Geneva uprising. Ashen root becomes symbol of truth in wine industry. Victor's name was scorched across every major outlet. He had lost control of the narrative. But Rosa was right. Cornered men strike hardest. That afternoon, as we regrouped in the Geneva hotel, a warning arrived. A hotel staffer, nervous, slipped me a note left at the front desk. "You've embarrassed him. Tonight he answers." Marco swore under his breath. "He won't stop with threats anymore." Rosa leaned close. "Nova, if you want to finish this, you'll need more than evidence. You'll need to confront him, directly." That night, we tracked Victor to a private villa outside the city, a fortress perched over Lake Geneva. Cars lined the driveway, his loyal financiers, desperate to salvage their investments. Marco tightened his grip on my arm. "This is madness." I shook my head. "No, this is the end." We slipped inside with Rosa's forged passes, moving through halls lined with art and arrogance. At the center, Victor held court in a room of chandeliers, his voice smooth, his hands painting futures built on lies. I stepped forward. "Future built on ash, Victor." The room froze. Dozens of eyes turned. Victor's smile faltered. "You should have stayed in Napa," he said softly. "You'll regret coming here." I raised the ledger high. You can burn barns, you can buy judges, you can silence workers. But you can't silence this. I dropped the book onto the table, pages spilling open, proof of his empire, surrounded now by the very investors he was courting. Cameras from hidden journalists clicked. Phones streamed live. Victor's calm cracked. His voice rose sharp with fury. You think you've beaten me? I am the valley. I am the roots. I met his glare. No, you're the rot. The spotlight seared my face, blinding me to everything else. Voices shouted in the dark, chairs scraped, panic rippled. And then, silence. Victor's voice slithered through the blackness. Survive tonight, Nova. The chandeliers blazed back on. His men surrounded the room, a dozen of them, closing in. Investors backed against the walls, terrified. Journalists clutching cameras but refusing to lower them. Marco stepped in front of me, shotgun raised. Rosa gripped my arm. We're live, she whispered. The whole world is watching. Victor strode forward, calm as a king, his mask of charm replaced with raw fury. You want truth? Fine. Let them see it. Let them see you fall. The men advanced. Marco fired into the air, deafening but deliberate. No one moves, he barked. The investors screamed. Journalists ducked, but the cameras kept rolling. Victor sneered. Empty theater. Do you think they'll save you? I stepped out from behind Marco, my voice shaking but strong. No, Victor. They'll see you. I lifted the ledger high. Every lie, every theft, every threat. Tonight the world sees what you really are. Gasps, shouts. The live stream ticked on phones. Hashtags already spread. Heart or truth in the vines. Victor lunged, trying to rip the ledger from my hands. But Rosa shoved him back, hard, her eyes blazing. Marco stepped forward, gun steady. The room erupted in chaos. Guards grabbing, cameras flashing. But through it all, I held the ledger high, pages fluttering like wings. And then, the sirens. Swiss police stormed the villa, shields raised, barking orders. The investors shrieked. The journalists surged. Victor's men scattered, dragged down in seconds. Victor himself froze, fury carved into his face. The officers seized him, forcing him to his knees. Even then, his eyes stayed locked on mine. You think this ends me? He spat. The valley has deeper roots than you'll ever cut. I stepped closer, ledger still in my grip. Rot always thinks it's eternal, but vines outlive rot. And I am the vines. They dragged him away. His empire collapsed in the glare of lights and cameras. The days that followed blurred into history. Headlines screamed across continents. Victor de Montclair arrested in Geneva. Ashen Root founder dismantles global laundering network. From betrayed wife to icon of justice. The vineyard in Napa survived. Jonah kept his promise, defending it with the workers. When I returned, scarred rows still stretched toward the sky, green against blackened soil. The community welcomed me not as a victim, but as a fighter. One evening, I stood among the vines at sunset, a glass of ashen root in my hand. Marco beside me, Rosa at my other side. Jonah walked the rows, quieter now, but steady. I raised the glass. To the vines, I whispered. To truth, to never being erased. The vineyard glowed gold in the fading light, alive, unbroken. Resolution, catharsis. I had lost a marriage. I had nearly lost my life. But I had gained something greater, clarity. Revenge had brought me here, yes. But truth carried me farther. The lesson was simple, carved into my heart like the rings of a vine. Power rots, but truth grows. And no matter how deep corruption digs, the vines will always reach for the light.